My name is Verity Ashby and I'm 31 years old. For 9 years, I sent my mother $2,600 every month, and for 9 years she told me it was going into a fund for her own mother's assisted living. My grandmother, Elspeth. That was the name on the paperwork my mother printed out and slid across the kitchen table the first time she asked. I signed a standing transfer authorization on a Wednesday morning before my shift, because that's what you do when your mother tells you your grandmother needs care and your family doesn't have enough. What my mother told our relatives about me during those 9 years was a different story entirely. I didn't make a scene when I heard it. I didn't call her back. I drove to work, I clocked in, and I thought about a phone call I'd received 3 weeks earlier from a woman named Patricia Howe, who introduced herself as my grandmother's estate attorney. She hadn't called my mother first. She'd called me. What was in that call, and what I found out about where $2,600 a month actually went for 9 years, nobody in my family saw that coming. Welcome back to channel, where quiet people finally close the account. If this story hits close to home, drop a comment before you leave, and hit subscribe so you don't miss the next one. I want to tell you about the kind of quiet that lives in a house where everyone knows their role and nobody says it out loud. In the Ashby house, the roles were clear from the time I was old enough to understand them. My older sister, Celeste, was the beautiful one, the one my parents dressed up for family photos, whose school plays they attended with a video camera, whose college acceptance letter they framed and hung in the hallway. My younger brother, Marcus, was the one with potential, the one my father called the future of this family at the dinner table on Sunday nights with a kind of reverence that didn't leave room for jokes. And then there was me. I was the dependable one. The one who got good grades without being celebrated for them. The one who learned to cook at 11 because my mother was busy driving Celeste to pageant rehearsal and someone needed to have dinner on the table. The one who took a second job in my senior year of high school, hostessing at a steakhouse on Route 9, and handed half my paychecks to my mother without being asked, because I'd heard her on the phone with my father saying they were short that month, and I didn't want anyone to be short. I thought that was love. I thought contributing quietly was the same as being valued. I grew up in Dunmore, Pennsylvania, a mid-sized city just outside Scranton, the kind of place where families know each other's business, and Sunday dinners at my grandmother's house on Callaway Street were the fixed point around which everything else orbited. My grandmother, Elspeth Ashby, was a woman who kept her own counsel. She had worked as a bookkeeper for 31 years at a regional insurance firm, retired at 64, and lived alone in the house my grandfather had built in 1968. She made her own bread. She balanced her own accounts. She did not ask for help unless she needed it, and she did not pretend to need it when she didn't. She and I had an understanding that didn't require much language. On Sunday afternoons, while the rest of the family watched football in the living room, Grandma Elspeth and I sat at her kitchen table, and she showed me things. How to read a bank statement. How to check that a transfer had cleared. How to keep a ledger by hand even if you had software to do it because, she said, software doesn't teach you to think. She wasn't preparing me for anything specific. She was just a woman who believed that knowing how money moved was the same as knowing how power moved, and she thought I ought to know. I became a licensed practical nurse at 22. I was working at a rehabilitation facility in Dunmore, making a salary that was modest and steady, and I had my own apartment, a one-bedroom on the 3rd floor of a building 6 blocks from a hospital. I drove a used Civic. I brought my lunch to work in a container I washed and reused. I had a savings account I contributed to every month and a checking account I kept lean. I was 22 years old, 3 months into my first full-time nursing position, when my mother called me on a Sunday evening and asked if we could talk. She came to my apartment. She sat across from me at my kitchen table, and she put a piece of paper between us. It had my grandmother's name at the top, Elspeth Jean Ashby, and below it, a breakdown of monthly care costs at a facility called Lakeview Gardens in Clark Summit. Mom's doctor says she needs more support than she's getting at home, my mother said. The memory issues. She had an episode last week where she left the stove on. We think she needs to be somewhere safe, but the waitlist at Lakeview is tied to a deposit fund. You have to be contributing to hold a spot. She told me the deposit fund required monthly contributions of $2,600 to maintain eligibility. She told me that she and my father were stretched, that Celeste was in her second year at a private university, that Marcus needed orthodonture, that there just wasn't room in their budget right now. She slid the paper closer to me. "You're the one who can do this right now, Verity. You're not paying for school. You don't have kids. I know it's a lot, but this is for Grandma." I looked at the paper. I thought about Grandma Elspeth at her kitchen table, showing me how a ledger worked. I thought about her alone in that house, the stove left on. I said yes. I set up a standing transfer that week. $2,600, first of every month, to an account my mother said was the Lakeview Gardens Deposit Fund. Asked once, early on, if I could get confirmation from the facility directly. My mother said she was handling the paperwork and she'd send me copies. The copies came, letterhead, a resident number, a quarterly statement showing the fund balance. I filed them in a folder, and I did not look too closely because looking too closely at something your mother has given you feels, when you are 22 and you trust her, like an accusation. That was the architecture of it. That's how it started. 9 years is a long time to send money. In 9 years, I worked my way from licensed practical nurse to registered nurse to the charge nurse position on the overnight rehabilitation unit at Dunmore Regional. I earned 3 certifications. I paid off my student loans. I kept sending $2,600 every month because the story was always the same. The fund needed to be maintained, the spot needed to be held, Grandma needed to be on the list. In 9 years, I visited my grandmother every Sunday that I wasn't working. She was at her kitchen table, she was making her bread, she was showing me the crossword. She did not appear to be at a memory care facility. When I asked my mother about the timeline, when would Grandma actually move in, my mother said it kept getting pushed, that the facility was backed up, that they were keeping Grandma's spot secured. I didn't push. I was sending the money. The spot was being held. My grandmother was fine for now. There were other things happening in those 9 years that I want you to understand, because they matter to what came later. The first Christmas I missed, I was 24, 2 years into the transfers, working a double on Christmas Eve and Christmas morning because I was the newest RN on the unit and the schedule worked that way. My mother called that evening and said the family had waited as long as they could and that they'd had dinner without me. "We didn't want the food to go cold," she said. I told her that was fine, I understood. 2 weeks later, I overheard her telling my aunt on the phone that I just didn't make family a priority. The second Christmas I missed, I was 27. Working an overnight because one of my colleagues had a sick child and I'd covered her shift. My mother didn't call that year. The year I was 28, I came down with pneumonia in February and missed 4 days of work. I called my mother to tell her I was sick, that I might need to skip the transfer that month or send a partial. She was quiet for a moment, and then she said, "Verity, we've structured everything around that contribution. 1 month throws the whole thing off." I sent the full amount. I covered it from savings. I ate rice and canned soup for 3 weeks. The year I was 29, Celeste got married. It was a large wedding, 140 guests at a venue outside Scranton, a live band, an open bar, a florist whose arrangements my mother posted about on social media for 2 weeks afterward. My parents paid for it. When I asked, gently, whether the family finances had eased up, whether, given that Celeste was now out of school and Marcus was working, I might reduce the monthly transfer, my mother said the facility had increased their rates and the full amount was still needed. I said okay. I reduced my own grocery budget and kept sending the $2,600. I want to tell you about one specific night because it is the night I think about most when I think about those years. It was a Thursday in November, 2 years before everything changed. I had worked a 13-hour shift, a bad one, the kind where you lose a patient you'd been rooting for and you drive home with your hands steady on the wheel and your chest hollowed out. I stopped at a gas station for a bottle of water and a granola bar because I'd forgotten to eat lunch, and I didn't have the energy to cook. I sat in my car in the parking lot of my apartment building for a few minutes before I went inside. My phone buzzed. It was a text from my mother. She had been at Celeste's house that evening for what she described as a family dinner. Herself, my father, Celeste, Celeste's husband, Marcus, and Marcus's girlfriend. She had sent me a group photo. Everyone around a table, candles lit, wine glasses raised. She hadn't invited me. The text said, "Missed you tonight. Celeste made her grandmother's pasta recipe. Thought of you." I looked at that text for a long time. Then I plugged my phone in, ate the granola bar, and went to sleep. I did not reduce the transfer. The phone call came on a Thursday morning in early March. I was at home. I'd worked an overnight, and I'd been asleep for about 4 hours when my phone rang with a number I didn't recognize, a local area code. I almost let it go to voicemail. Something made me answer. Is this Verity Ashby? The voice was professional, measured. A woman older. Yes. My name is Patricia Howe. I'm an estate attorney here in Scranton. I represent your grandmother, Elspeth Ashby, and I'm calling because she's asked me to reach out to you directly. She'd like to meet with you, with both of us present, at your earliest convenience. I sat up. Is my grandmother all right? She's well, Patricia said. She wants to speak with you about some matters related to her estate. She was very specific that I call you first, before contacting any other family member. I said I could come in the next morning. Patricia gave me the address. I wrote it on the back of an envelope from my nightstand, and I sat there in my apartment for a while after I hung up, thinking about my grandmother's hands on a ledger. Her voice sang, "Knowing how money moves is knowing how power moves." I didn't tell my mother about the call. I went to Patricia Howe's office on a Friday morning. It was a modest suite on the second floor of a building on Spruce Street, a waiting room with neutral carpet, a rubber plant in the corner that had seen better days, a receptionist who offered me coffee. Patricia came out to greet me. Late 50s, practical suit, reading glasses pushed up on her head. She shook my hand the way people do when they've been told something about you that made them want to meet you. She walked me back to her office. My grandmother was already there, sitting in one of the 2 chairs across from Patricia's desk, her hands folded in her lap, her coat still on. She looked up when I came in, and something in her expression shifted, a loosening, a relief. "Sit down, sweetheart," she said.
Iset.
Patricia closed the door and took her place behind the desk. She opened a folder. She looked at me and then at my grandmother, and my grandmother gave a small nod. "Verity," Patricia said, "your grandmother came to me 18 months ago. She wanted to formalize her estate documents, her will, her power of attorney, her advance directive. In the course of our conversations, she mentioned something that she asked me to help her look into."
She paused.
"Are you familiar with an account your mother described to you as the Lakeview Gardens Assisted Living Deposit Fund?" My hands went still in my lap. "Yes," I said. "Your grandmother asked me to pull the records on that account. We requested statements through the bank. She holds a joint position on the original account that enabled us to do that." Patricia turned a page in the folder. "Verity, Lakeview Gardens has no record of a deposit fund in your grandmother's name. They have no record of your grandmother on any waitlist at any point in the last 9 years. The rubber plant in the waiting room, the neutral carpet, the fluorescent hum of the overhead light. I was aware of all of it with unusual clarity. I did not speak. The account your mother set up," Patricia continued, "received transfers consistently from your account from March of that first year through last month. The total transferred over that period is $280,800. She said the number the way you say a number when you want the person across from you to have a moment to absorb it before you keep going. $280,800. My grandmother reached over and put her hand on my forearm. Her hand was dry and warm and very steady. "I didn't know," she said. "I want you to hear me say that. I had no memory problems. There was no episode with the stove. I didn't know what she was telling you until 8 months ago, when your cousin Renata mentioned something at Easter about the fund you'd been contributing to for years." I called Patricia the next morning. I looked at my grandmother's face. She was looking at me with the same expression she'd had at that kitchen table, showing me ledger columns, direct and clear, and asking me to pay attention. "What do you want to do?" Patricia asked me. "I want to explain what happened before the day everything became visible to the rest of my family, because the days between Patricia's office and that Sunday afternoon mattered. They were the days I had to decide what kind of person I was going to be in the aftermath of learning something that changes the geometry of your entire past. I did not call my mother. I did not send an accusatory text. I did not talk to Celeste or Marcus or any of the relatives who had been at the family dinners I wasn't invited to. What I did was this. I asked Patricia to pull every document she could. I asked for the complete transaction history, stamped and certified. I asked for a letter from Lakeview Gardens on their official letterhead confirming that no deposit fund existed in my grandmother's name. Patricia had both ready by the following Tuesday. I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where my mother had put those first papers in front of me 11 years earlier, and I went through the certified statements page by page. $280,800. 84 transfers. I was a charge nurse. I knew how to read documentation under conditions that required me not to let the numbers change what my hands needed to do. I read every page. Then I called my bank, and I closed the standing transfer authorization. I didn't tell my mother I'd done it. The following Sunday was my grandmother's 81st birthday. Every year, regardless of family tensions or schedules, or who had last said what to whom, my grandmother's birthday dinner was held at her house on Callaway Street. It had been that way my entire life. My mother cooked. My aunt brought dessert. The whole extended family came. My grandmother's 2 surviving siblings, several cousins, my father's side of the family who showed up out of habit and genuine affection for Elspeth Ashby. It was the one occasion where the seating chart didn't have a hierarchy because my grandmother didn't permit one at her own table. I called my grandmother on Thursday and asked if Patricia could attend. My grandmother said she had already invited her. I arrived at the house on Callaway Street at 4:30. The driveway was already full. My parents' car, Celeste's SUV, Marcus's truck, my aunt and uncle's minivan. I could hear the noise of the family from the front walk. Voices overlapping, something on the stove, my cousin's kids running through the hallway. I stood on the porch for a moment. Something settled in my chest. Not hardness, something more like the feeling you have before a long shift when you've checked your equipment and everything is where it needs to be. I went inside. My mother was in the kitchen. She turned when I came through the door, and her expression arranged itself into the particular warmth she produced for social occasions.
Verity.
You made it. She said it the way you say something to fill the air rather than because it means anything. I made it, I said. I hugged my grandmother first. Elspeth held on a beat longer than usual. I found a corner near the window in the living room, and I waited. Patricia arrived at 5:15. She came through the front door with my grandmother's neighbor, Dorothy. The 2 of them had driven together, and she greeted my grandmother with a kiss on the cheek and my aunt with a handshake. She had a document envelope under her arm, the kind with a metal clasp. She set it on the side table near the bookcase, and she did not draw attention to it. My mother noticed it. I watched her notice it from across the room. Her gaze moved from the envelope to Patricia to my grandmother, and something in her expression flickered. There and gone. The way a draft moves through a room before you've located the open window. Dinner was served at 6. 22 people around 2 pushed-together tables in my grandmother's dining room and sunroom, the way it always was. My grandmother sat at the head. My mother sat to her left, as she always did. I sat at the far end near my cousin Renata and her husband, and I ate my grandmother's birthday pasta, and I talked to Renata about her kids, and I did not watch my mother watching me. Dessert was cleared at 7:30. My grandmother's neighbor Dorothy brought out the birthday cake, a lemon cake from the bakery on Mulberry, Elspeth's preference since before I was born, and we sang, and my grandmother blew out the single candle, and there was the usual moment of laughter and applause. Then my grandmother pushed her chair back and stood. She did not raise her voice. She did not have to. There is a quality some people carry in a room, a gravitational weight that comes from decades of meaning exactly what they say, and Elspeth Ashby had it. When she stood, the room went quiet by its own volition. I want to say something before everyone leaves, she said, because I want the people I love to hear it directly from me, in this room, rather than piecemeal later. She looked at Patricia, who reached for the document envelope and unclasped it. I've asked my attorney to be here this evening because I want to share something that concerns this family. Something I learned 8 months ago. Her eyes moved around the table, unhurried, methodical, the way she moved through a ledger. They landed, for one moment, on my mother. Then they moved to me. For 9 years, my grandmother said, my granddaughter Verity has been sending $2,600 a month to an account she was told was my assisted living deposit fund. The sound of the room changed. It didn't go loud. It went the specific quiet of 22 people recalibrating. I was not on a wait list. I did not have memory difficulties. I never asked for that money, and I did not receive it.
She paused.
Patricia. Patricia stood and set a single sheet on the table, the certified bank summary, face up. The total transferred from Verity's account over 84 months, she said, in a voice that was entirely professional and therefore utterly merciless, is $280,800. I have a letter from Lakeview Gardens confirming they have no record of a deposit account in Elspeth Ashby's name at any point in their records. She set the Lakeview letter next to the bank summary. She sat down. No one spoke. My mother's face, I will describe it the way I observed it, factually. The color left it. Not suddenly, the way a light switches off, but the way water drains from a basin, slowly and completely, until what remains is just the shape of the thing. Her hands, which had been resting on either side of her dessert plate, moved to her lap below the tablecloth. My father, beside her, went entirely still, the way a person goes still when they are processing information and have not yet decided what the information means. Celeste said, "Mom." Just the one word. My grandmother sat back down. She reached for her water glass and she took a measured sip and she set it down. "I've updated my will," she said. "Patricia has those documents as well, but I'll share the relevant point. I've made Verity my primary beneficiary and named her as the executor of my estate. That's been in place for 6 months. The rest of my wishes are in the will itself, which Patricia holds." She looked at her hands for a moment. "I'm telling you this now because I don't want there to be surprises after I'm gone. I would rather have an uncomfortable evening than a dishonest one." Renata's husband reached over and put his hand on the table near mine, not touching, just present. My cousin's eyes were bright. My aunt, across the table, was looking at my mother with an expression that I had never seen on her face before and hope I never see again on anyone's, the expression of a person understanding, retroactively, many things at once. I looked at my mother. She was looking at the bank summary in the center of the table. She had not looked up. I thought about all the Sunday evenings I'd eaten granola bars in my car. I thought about the group photo with the candles and the wine glasses. I thought about driving to Patricia Howe's office with an address written on the back of an envelope. I did not gloat. I didn't deliver a speech. I looked at my mother until she looked up, and when she did, I held her gaze for 3 seconds. Then I turned to my grandmother and said, "Do you want another piece of cake?" My grandmother looked at me for a moment with something in her face that I can only describe as recognition, the look of one careful person seeing another. "Yes," she said. "I think I do." The room recovered itself the way rooms do, slowly, in corners, with the sound of chairs and dessert plates and people deciding where to look. My father left the table within 10 minutes. I heard him in the hallway on his phone, his voice low and controlled. Celeste sat very still beside her husband, who was studying the window behind my grandmother's head with intense focus. Marcus had gone to the kitchen, ostensibly to help with the cake, and I did not see him come back. My mother did not move for a long time. When people began to filter toward the door, the cousins, my grandmother's siblings, Dorothy, there was a quality to the goodbyes that I recognized from years of watching family dynamics compress in moments of stress. People hugged my grandmother a beat longer than usual. 2 of my cousins, women I'd grown up with but rarely spoke to, stopped beside me on their way out and made brief, meaningful eye contact. One of them squeezed my shoulder, without speaking. I helped my grandmother clear the dessert dishes. We worked side by side in the kitchen, and she told me about a bird she'd seen at her feeder that week, a yellow warbler, she thought, though she wasn't certain. I told her about a patient I'd had recently who'd brought her a paperback mystery novel from his discharge bag as a thank you, which made her laugh. We did not talk about the dining room. Before I left, she walked me to the door and held both my hands the way she did when I was small. "You've been carrying this a long time," she said. "I have," I said. "Not anymore." I drove home with the radio off. I want to tell you what happened in the weeks and months that followed, not because the collapse of someone's careful performance is a satisfying thing to watch up close, but because I think it matters to understand what the consequences of 9 years actually looked like, and what they didn't look like. My mother called me the night after the birthday dinner. I let it ring. She called the next morning and the morning after that. On the fourth day, she left a voicemail. Her voice had the particular quality I had heard many times in the families of patients I cared for, the quality of a person who has spent years being the one who sets the terms, encountering for the first time a situation where the terms have been set by someone else. She said she wanted to explain. She said the money had gone to things the family needed. She didn't specify what, but she said it had kept things together during hard years. She said she knew it looked bad, and she wanted the chance to sit down together. I did not return the call. Celeste called me the following week. Her call was different, quieter, shorter. She said, "I didn't know." I believe her. I told her I believed her. We stayed on the phone for about 4 minutes and then she said she needed time to think, and I said that was reasonable. Marcus sent a text. It said, "That was a lot to find out. I don't know what to say."
I'm sorry.
I texted back, "I know. Thank you. We have not had a longer conversation yet. I think we will, eventually." My father called once, 3 weeks after the birthday dinner. He spoke for a long time about circumstances and pressures, and how complicated things had been during the years when Celeste was in school. He said my mother had meant to tell me. He said the money had gone to real needs. When he was finished, I said, "I understand you felt the pressure. I want you to know that I worked every Christmas and overtime every February for 9 years because I believed my grandmother needed me to. That's what I want you to sit with." Then I said I had to go, and I ended the call. My hands were steady. Patricia filed the estate documents formally the week after the dinner. My mother received a copy as a matter of family notification, not as a beneficiary, but as a named party for administrative purposes. I don't know what she did with it. I spoke to the bank about the account the transfers had gone to. They confirmed the history Patricia had already documented. I did not file anything formal. I had spoken with Patricia about my options and made the decision that was right for me. What I wanted was not a legal proceeding. What I wanted was to stop sending money to a place that didn't exist, to have the people I loved know what had been happening, and to make sure my grandmother's wishes were protected going forward. All of those things had happened. 6 months after the birthday dinner, my grandmother and I had lunch at a restaurant she liked on Jefferson Avenue. She ordered the chicken piccata. She told me about a book she was reading, a biography of Eleanor Roosevelt that she thought was overlong but worthwhile. At the end of the meal, she put an envelope on the table. "Open it at home," she said. Inside was a handwritten letter and a bank transfer receipt. The letter said that she had been setting aside a sum every month since speaking with Patricia, money from her own accounts, the savings she had kept for 60 years, and that she wanted me to have it. Not as restitution, she wrote, because the word restitution implied a transaction, and what she wanted was not to correct a transaction but to give me something freely, woman to woman, as she should have been doing all along. The amount was $60,000. She had written at the bottom of the letter, in her careful accountant's hand, "You already know how to use this properly. That's why I'm giving it to you." I sat in my car outside my apartment building, and I read the letter twice. Then I went upstairs and made a cup of tea, and I sat at my kitchen table, the same table where all of this started, and I thought about a yellow warbler that might or might not have been at my grandmother's feeder, and the smell of lemon cake, and the particular quiet of a dining room when 22 people understand something at the same time. I was 31 years old. I had my nursing certifications, my apartment, my savings account, and $60,000 I hadn't earned by staying quiet. I had learned at 22 that love and money can be made to look identical from the outside. I had learned at 31 that they are not the same thing, and that the people who confuse them deliberately are counting on you not to check the ledger. My grandmother taught me how to check the ledger. I checked it. That's my story. A standing transfer authorization, a lemon birthday cake, and a letter dated in my grandmother's careful hand. Some things stay with you. The way a room goes quiet when a number is read aloud. The way a phone call at 7 in the morning from a stranger who uses your full name can change the entire shape of what you thought you knew. And the way it feels to drive home with the radio off, knowing that the account is closed and the ledger is balanced, and that the person who taught you to read it has your back. If you were sitting in that dining room when Patricia laid those documents on the table, would you have said something, or would you have let the papers speak? Drop your answer in the comments. Drop a comment, hit subscribe, and I'll see you in the next one.